I'm going to give you guys the best stats for DraftKings NHL DFS. It's my 2019 daily fantasy hockey preview, and it's starting right now. What's up, guys? Welcome to another daily fantasy sports video. If this is your first time here and you want to become a profitable DFS player and get better at betting, start now by subscribing to the channel, but don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything along the way. And if you're already a Holkamaniac, you know exactly what time it is. Smash that like button and we'll get rolling. Basically did a kind of massive study for Fantasy Labs, just kind of going through some of the top metrics and then seeing how they kind of measure up for plus minus, which is basically just the value based on what their salary is, but also the consistency and the ownership. So kind of hit it on all three angles there. So what you want in NHL is to target guys that are having a little bit more consistency as well. So, I mean, it's an event-based sport, but that doesn't mean that you can't target players that are shooting a lot. That's the best way to kind of build in a floor first. So build in your consistency, and then hopefully you end up kind of getting goals and assists as more of a luxury. So would you compare it at all, Sean, to like touchdowns in NFL? Like, we're not necessarily just chasing like touchdown scores. We're more essentially chasing volume. And I think the best way to do that is still by targeting shots in NHL.
Yeah, it's similar. It's a little bit different. I would more equate it to like chasing home runs in MLB or
Okay.
something. You're looking more towards you're looking. You want the peripheral stats to be there. The problem is events in hockey are massive. A goal, it would probably be the equivalent. What would you say a goal would be the equivalent of like two and a half touchdowns or something in NFL?
True. Yeah, it is much more drastic. Same thing with goalies getting the win. It's much more drastic than a pitcher getting a win in baseball.
Correct. So like you're talking like shot on goal is probably like let's say one catch for 20 yards, and a goal is two touchdowns or
It's
two
like
and
a
a half.
it's like a Tyreek Hill 70-yard bomb.
Correct. So they're two different things. But the problem is with the NFL, you can gauge who's going to have massive yardage games, massive reception games type thing. Hockey, you can just get your best guess at who's going to put up the shot. The problem is there's just less shots. If a guy has, let's say, 8 shots, that's the equivalent of, let's say, a guy that has 8 catches for 120 yards type of game. So they're different things. But yeah, the problem is in hockey is people aren't scoring tons of goals. People aren't going to score tons of assists. You're looking at the best players in the league average 1 point per game. So basically, the best players in the league are averaging two touchdown event per game, give or take. Like an assist is probably worth a touchdown, and a goal is worth like 2 touchdowns.
Yep.
So basically, you have the best players in the NHL are averaging between like 1.5 touchdowns a game or 2 touchdowns a game, probably. So all you can really do is get guys that are going to shoot. The guys that are going to shoot are going to generate more score points in general. They're going to score more often. They're going to get more assists. And just in general, they're going to get stuff when they don't do that as well. So if you have a guy that, let's say, gets a lot of assists but doesn't take any shots, one of our favorites is Joe Thornton. Joe Thornton is a guy that's a very good playmaker. He gets, let's say, 50, 60 assists a year. The problem is he doesn't shoot. Right. So basically with Joe Thornton, if he gets an assist and does nothing else for the whole game, you're looking at a guy that, let's say, got a 1-yard touchdown. It would be like playing James Devlin.
Yep.
So you're just not getting statistics from him. Whereas if you play a guy that's going to take 8 shots, well, it's like, okay, he didn't score, but he had 5 or 6 shots. At least you're not buried compared to where you would be otherwise.
Yeah, Doozy in the chat said it's like PPR, and I agree. And kind of to your point, Sean, it's not even just the floor of these guys; it's the ceiling. So like someone like Nick Backstrom, like yeah, like the game where he has 3 assists and 1 shot on goal, it looks great in the box score. But I mean, his ceiling still is much lower than a guy like Brent Burns, our boy that we like to talk about so much. Even someone like your boy Evander Kane. He's going to stack up 5 or 6 shots on goal if he scores on top of that and then it happens to add an assist. Like his ceiling is massively different than a guy like Backstrom, and they're priced very similarly. So more or less, we're trying to target these guys where we know we have that consistent floor game in and game out. And we kind of just get the upside from the goals when they happen. It's just more or less like same type of thing like on the Corsi page. Like teams are going to give up goals if they give up shots. So if we're targeting situations where teams are giving up a lot of shots, hopefully we already have the consistent players behind that, and we can grab some goals in good high-paced situations. So that's more or less how I'm approaching it, how I know Sean has kind of taught me how to approach it. So this study in general, basically what you're looking at here as the chart is plus minus, like I said, but I'm looking at different buckets of percentiles. So the bottom 50% of shots all the way up to the top 1% of shots over the past month. So as you can see, consistency obviously goes up. That's the blue line as the percentile goes up, but the plus minus spikes drastically kind of for that top 5%. Here, I'll zoom in a little bit more so you guys can see this better. So as you can see, so from the top 5 percentile up, consistency spikes almost 50%. That's massive for an event-based sport. So shots are going to kind of, on the second chart, you can see the purple line is ownership. Shots are definitely going to kind of skew towards ownership as well. But again, there's value in like that top 5 percentile shooters based on their plus minus and their ownership. So was that surprising to you at all, Sean? I guess like I figured that ownership would kind of tail shots just because that's where points are coming from. But that last 5% still like is under owned based on these charts.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because a lot of people are following shots as well because shots are what's going to generate goal. But what happens, and it's the thing we talked about, these elite plays, they're under owned in these sports. If you look at NBA, you look at NFL, the elite plays are 80% owned. Hockey, the elite plays are going to be 15 to 20% owned. So what you find is that these top end plays aren't owned as much as they should be just because there's so many different plays that are similar. The difference between an elite play and, like, let's say a very good play is also not what it is in these other sports. These elite plays are maybe, let's say, a shot a game better than what these other plays are. So it's not a massive gap as it would be in other sports.
Yeah, Doozy says, imagine not playing Kane in Showdown. It's crazy, man. Like, Showdown is something that I've just recently started this season playing, and the amount of people that will just try and jam in both goalies and just totally avoid these like layup plays like Tyler Seguin last night, these plays like Patrick Kane where their floor is 4 or 5 shots is completely insane. So the other part of this study, I did this for basically all the stats, we'll go through a couple more of them, was just break this down by position. So defensemen in the top 10, 5, and 1%, massively consistent. So I'm trying to jam in as many of those kind of defensemen as I can. It's interesting that the consistency does drop at winger and center. Is that somewhat surprising to you, Sean? I mean, I know defensemen in general are kind of put in a position to put pucks on net quite a bit more. They also block more shots. But the consistency for some of these elite defensemen that shoot a lot, I guess, is a pretty big difference that we should probably talk about.
Yeah, I think that the centers, it doesn't surprise me that much because a lot of the centers, they're there because they're elite playmakers.
I will say it quickly. Center is one that does benefit a lot from blocking shots. So this is only looking at shots on goal. So wingers are obviously going to spike ahead of centermen here because wingers shoot a lot, but they don't block as many shots as centermen. So I want to touch on that quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So like the centers, like it's not surprising when you're filtering with shot percentage, but the centers aren't going to take as many shots in general because they're more of the playmakers, whereas the wingers are the guys that are taking shots. So you see that the wingers are a little bit higher up here in this situation, but the defensemen are a lot of the time under owned and underappreciated, but some of these defensemen just have more massive floors than anybody else by a lot. So when you're looking at a guy like Brent Burns or guys like him that shoot the puck a lot and block a lot of shots, they are going to be the most consistent players because they have a lot more peripheral stats added, whereas guys that are more shooters that don't really block any shots are going to have games where they only have 2 or 3 shots and they're not going to hit the value. Whereas those guys that are big defensemen that have a 2 or 3 shot game, well, all of a sudden they have a 2 or 3 block shot game as well, and it's a more consistent outcome.
Yeah, and I mean, even so, these are pretty high consistency numbers here, but the ownership definitely isn't out of control. So kind of what I was alluding to before we move on to blocks. So this is essentially, if you don't know hockey, this is a very, very specific kind of where guys are going in the defensive zone. So it makes sense. Like these left wingers or right wingers, they're up kind of towards the other team's defensemen. The centermen and the defensemen are closer to the net, so there's more time for them to get in front and block more shots. So what you really want to look for at wingers is guys that can get it done on the offensive side of things because their floor, as far as block shots, are going to be a lot lower. So someone like Alexander Ovechkin, Patrick Kane, who Doozy was talking about, these guys shoot the puck a ton, but they're not going to have that extra bonus from block shots like a centerman like Patrice Bergeron or defenseman like Burns will have as well. So by the way, guys, if you've ever found value in any of my videos or live streams, one of the best ways to support what I'm doing here for free is to throw me the follow over on Twitter. But if you're new to the community, I also do a ton of content exclusive to Instagram. So if you take a few seconds and just make sure you're following me over there as well, I'd really appreciate it. Blocks, obviously, you don't have the upside of scoring a goal. You don't have the upside of potentially getting an assist off of a rebound, but it's just an added type of floor. So what I found kind of in these studies is that it actually is really important to target block shots specifically at the center and defense position if we want consistency. So going to one of these charts again from before, you'll see that the plus minus actually drops a little bit past the top 5th percentile. So this is just all power play skaters. The interesting part is this second chart, I think, where the ownership is, that the blocks tend to garner more ownership. And so basically what this tells me is that, yeah, their elite shot blockers are fine, but on their own, just like I'm not interested in rostering a guy that's in the 95th, 99th percentile in blocks, but doesn't give me any shot upside as well. It's fine for floor, but the ceiling just isn't anywhere near where it is for shots.
Yeah. The ceiling with blocks is nowhere near it, but the problem is a lot of the time you get guys that are heavily reduced in price point, so it sort of removes the need for that ceiling. Yeah. A guy like, let's say, Radko Gudas or Chris Russell, if they're playing 25 plus minutes and they're going to get you 6 to 8 block shots, you don't necessarily care as much about the upside if they're 3,500. So you find guys that are that elite block shots, but if their price point is right, you can sort of give up your upside chance for the guys for what they give you in consistency.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later when we talk about paying all the way up for defensemen or paying all the way down. I'm sure that's kind of what you're alluding to, and then the difference between offensive defensemen versus defensive defensemen. Sometimes there's definitely a discount in price for some of these non-elite scorers, but their floor is really nice if you're trying to punt and get up to some other studs in kind of a stars and scrubs approach. So not a ton else to really gain from this study outside of these centermen just really popping in the plus minus in particular for these guys that block a ton of shots, and the ownership isn't very high. So top 5 percentile in blocks, as those are guys like Patrice Bergeron, who always seems to kind of pop in my head as a centerman who blocks a ton of shots. But the ownership just really doesn't skew towards these guys based on what their floor is and what their value is based on where they're priced. So the centermen who block shots are drastically underpriced in my opinion. Anything else on this chart that you think stands out, Sean?
Yeah, the centermen are drastically under-owned for the most part, the block shots, and that's something that you will see, and if you play enough, you will notice that as well. The defensemen, though, you see, like, they're very consistent. If you have a top-end defenseman who blocks a lot of shots, if you're in the top percentiles, they're one of the more consistent plays in this area, which is something that is a very valuable thing, especially if you can find a guy that also has that upside.
So the wingers that I like to kind of talk about before we move out from block, like, so there's exceptions, right? So there are some wingers that do block a decent amount of shots. So Patrick Hornquist is one of those guys that always kind of stands out to me in that regard. He actually does have a significant floor with block shots. There's other guys that are like this. It's not necessarily the norm. So are you targeting these guys at the winger position where you can, when you don't really get this type of floor with wingers usually?
Yeah, there's very few. Hornquist is the best example. He's someone that Joe and I would literally talk about every single time Pittsburgh was on a slate.
Yeah.
Because not only does he give you a bit of a floor with the block shots, but his shot volume's up near the top of the league as well. So when you add both of those together and you have a guy that was, I think Hornquist for the most part was on around 5,500 for price point on DraftKings, with the exception being when he was on one of his heaters when he was scoring quite a bit of goals, then he would be up more towards 7K. But Hornquist is one of the better wingers you can play due to his shot volume and the addition of block shots as well.
Yeah, so he's like the guy that doesn't really kind of apply to what some of these rules are, in my opinion. So the next one that we're going to talk about, obviously, is combining these. So our boy Brent Burns, so shots plus blocks is a metric that we added to the models at Fantasy Labs when we were doing our work over there. Pretty similar, but so here's kind of, I wanted to go through the difference in some of these charts now. So we looked at shots, we looked at blocks. Shots plus blocks drastically higher as far as trying to get plus minus. And look at this gap. So the gap between The green line, which is plus minus, so value based on their price, and the purple line, ownership, is drastically different for shots plus blocks than if we're just looking purely at shooters. So, Sean, I know this is a metric we were using a ton to try and find value, try and find upside, but you can't really deny the value based on just targeting shots plus blocks as a metric, but also the difference in ownership.
No, there's really no way to ignore it. And that's the reason we use this as the main metric that we would talk about when talking about plays and talking about the shows. The consistency of guys that are in the upper percentile in blocks plus shots is very good. The upside in them is very good. And just in general, they make the best plays because of what they do from a peripheral standpoint, as well as their goal scoring and assist output as well. So there's a reason why this would be the main thing that we would talk about. And this is the main thing to look at when looking at plays for a slate.
Yeah, because I mean, just looking at this first chart, even if in the top 10th percentile in shots plus blocks is getting you almost a 48 consistency rating. And then if we're just looking purely at consistency in that same range, you're almost at 50% there. It's just a great metric to just get an idea, a general idea of someone's peripheral stats, which is what we're trying to stack up. Again, if we're knocking this down to position by position, the defenseman really popping as far as consistency. These elite centermen, though, these shots plus blocks to centermen, it's not to really beat a dead horse here, but there is a ton of value at paying up at center for guys like Austin Matthews, like these guys that will block shots at a decent clip, as well as provide shooting upside. So the consistency for those guys is something that definitely stands out. So yeah, not surprising that we touched on Patrice Bergeron in this, but yeah, our boy Evander Kane. So I guess kind of an example, he's a 90th percentile shots plus blocks guy. Definitely offers some consistency, which we talked about before. So let's move on. Just a reminder, if you're looking to invest in yourself and take your game to that next level, make sure you're taking advantage of the live streams over on Twitch. A lot of people don't realize that if they have an Amazon Prime account, and a lot of people do these days, you automatically have access to a free Twitch Prime subscription. So with that, you get access to my premium Discord chat, as well as a bunch of other subscriber-only perks for various sports. You're seriously doing yourself a disservice if you're not getting involved with the community at that level. Make sure you follow me at twitch.tv/Joe Holka so you don't miss when I go live. A lot of people will probably make fun of the Corsi crowd in some ways, but this same type of research that I did for these other stats, I also did for Corsi. So I guess we should probably talk about what Corsi actually is. It's shots on goal plus missed shots plus shot attempts blocked. So basically, how often a guy or a team is actually getting pucks to the net is really important. So it kind of measures intent, not just the shots that make it on goal or the shot attempts that are just thrown towards the net. So Corsi 4, it makes sense that it's one of the best stats that there is. It's why we're using it to kind of judge what pace is at a game level, but also at a team level. If we scroll down, we talked about shots. Look at the difference in Corsi as far as plus minus. It's basically through the roof compared to these. So if we're just looking purely at plus minus, it is much higher than shots. But if we're just looking at it based on ownership, again, we want to see a big gap in value and in ownership. So if we're targeting these elite Corsi skaters, so top 5%, top 1%, look at the massive difference in ownership and based on what value you're getting from these guys. So this is all skaters. It's actually even more drastic at center. Corsi is like the most important metric there is at the center position. Believe it or not, I'm using this pretty heavily in my models at the center position in particular. It is kind of a great impact on what players are actually making stuff happen on the offensive end. Sean, I know when we first did this, you weren't surprised that Corsi was one of the best metrics because it is something that really takes into account how they're playing offensively as a whole.
Yeah, it shows who's taking the most shots, where the shots are coming from, and it really helps to determine who the best players are. In terms of who a best player is, I don't necessarily care if it's Connor McDavid. If you have one of Joe's boys, Johnny Brodzinski, come out and he plays 15 minutes, but he takes 8 shots and his Corsi is high, I don't really care about much else, especially from a DFS standpoint. DFS, the only thing we care about are shots, block shots, goals, assists. That's it. After that, it's not something that we really find relevant. So if a guy gives up a ton of shots against because he's just terrible defensively and can't clear the puck or something, it doesn't matter. I only care about guys that are going to be putting the puck on the net and generating peripheral stats, because that's where we're getting our DFS points from. So finding guys that have high Corsis are going to be your best plays from a DFS perspective, because those are the guys that are generating those shot attempts.
Yeah, I think the odds were probably set at plus 1,000 that you had mentioned a college hockey player before me. So cash your tickets on that one. Yeah, Brazi's actually a community member with us. He's jumped in on some chats during NFL season. But yeah, we're targeting these guys that shoot a lot. He's definitely one of those guys. Something that on this chart that stands out right away, obviously the elite centerman, like we talked about, Corsi being extremely important, but the upside rating for these guys, for Corsi in particular, the upside is always higher. So what the upside metric is, it's basically a percentage in games in which a player has scored at least 1/2 of their standard deviation. Essentially, it's just higher upside players for tournaments. And Corsi is one of the metrics that encompasses that better than almost any of them. If you want to learn more about how to become a profitable daily fantasy sports player and better, start now by hitting the subscribe icon in the bottom right-hand corner so you don't miss anything. Be on the lookout for all of my DFS courses for other sports. Of course, they're all on demand, completely free. But finish off the hockey course first, and I will see you guys next time.